Thank you for tuning in to Terry Swoop Videos. On today's video, I'm going to talk about the legendary R&B singer, Joe Tex. He's one of the pioneers of R&B. He's also one of the pioneers of rock and roll. Joe Tex is one of the greatest writers and producers in the history of music. And his style is very similar to James Brown. In fact, James Brown got a lot of his material, he got a lot of his style from Joe Tex. And this created a feud between the two of them during the late 1950s and early 60s. Little Richard even acknowledges that James Brown got a lot of his dance moves from Joe Tex. So when you listen to him, you may think, oh, he must have got this from James Brown. But actually, James Brown got a lot of his style from Joe Tex. And Joe Tex started in music before James Brown started in music. And they had a huge rivalry between the two of them between the 1950s and early 1960s. Now, Joe Tex was born and raised in Rogers, Texas on August 8th, 1935. At 19 years old in 1954, he got his first break when he appeared on the Apollo. He won the show 4 weeks in a row, destroyed the competition, and after the notoriety that he got from being on the Apollo, that's what got him his first record deal with King Records. And when he signs with King Records, him and James Brown are on the same record label. And this is what started the feud. Joe Tex accused James Brown of stealing his style, and James Brown accused Joe Tex of stealing his style. And they would even mimic each other's songs. Their feud really got heated when James Brown started sleeping with Joe Tex's ex-wife. And Joe Tex responded by calling him out on stage. Every time he would perform, he would call James Brown out on stage. He would imitate him. He would make fun of him. And this infuriated James Brown. So when Joe Tex is performing in Georgia, he was performing at a concert in Macon, Georgia. And James Brown and his crew showed up and they shot up the club. They shot up the club that Joe Tex was performing in. And apparently several people were shot in this club. James Brown was never prosecuted because he settled the matter out of court by paying off every person that was shot in the club. And Joe Tex never filed charges for some reason. Maybe he was too afraid to file charges. James Brown was very ruthless when he was younger. He became more mature as he got older, and they eventually squashed their beef as they became older men. In 1967, Joe Tex scored a crossover hit with the song Skinny Legs and All. It made the top 10 on the Hot 100s, and it sold over 2 million copies.
This is #1 record for us in the States sometime back, a million seller. Skinny Legs. Say, man, don't worry about that woman like she don't belong to you. Just cause her got them little skinny legs, you know there ain't no way to do. Did it like that when she was at home behind them closed doors. All right. She ain't be ashamed of that woman. You don't want nobody over here in Madrid, Spain to know that woman, Joe. That's all right. Just walk on, baby. And don't you worry about a doggone thing at all. And someone, somewhere will take you, baby. Skinny legs. Mister, hey, don't you worry about a doggone thing at all. Someone, somewhere will take you. Rock and roll.
During the 1970s, Joe Tex had dozens of hit songs, but his biggest song of the 1970s was I Gotcha. This song went to #1 on the R&B charts, and it went to #2 on the pop charts. It sold 5 million copies worldwide, and it became his biggest hit of his career.
Come on, hold it down, hold it down, hold it down, hold it down. Now ease up on me, now get it back.
When When the 1980s comes around, Joe Tex is in his late 40s. And he starts having problems with drugs and alcohol. And this is what happens with a lot of entertainers, a lot of singers, a lot of musicians have problems with drugs and alcohol. We saw it with Jimi Hendrix, we saw it with John Lennon, we saw it with Elvis, we saw it with Michael Jackson. And Joe Tex had problems with drugs and alcohol towards the end of his life. On August 10th, 1982, Joe Tex was found at the bottom of a pool after a apparent overdose. He was rushed to the hospital, they revived him, and they sent him home. They gave him a clean bill of health, and he goes home, and within a few days, he dies of a heart attack. He was 47 years old. He died on August 13th, 1982. Now, over the years, he hasn't been remembered the same way a lot of great musicians in history have been remembered. He's not remembered in the same way that James Brown was remembered. He's not remembered in the same way that Marvin Gaye was remembered. He's not remembered in the same way that Michael Jackson was remembered. His career has gone under the radar, even though he's one of the greatest musicians of all time. He paved the way for a lot of rock and roll singers and R&B singers in history. And he's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. When a lot of these other musicians, like James Brown, like Michael Jackson, are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I just think he should be honored more and he should be remembered more based on his contributions to the history of music. A lot of people have different opinions about this topic. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment, rate and subscribe. Turn on those notification bells for future videos.